Join me, Katya Adler, every weekday as I take a closer look at the stories making the headlines, with insights from the BBC's global network of experts. Search for The Global Story wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Welcome to The Inquiry with me, Tanya Beckett. One question, 4 expert witnesses, and an answer. It's less than a year before Paris will play host to the 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games, and the excitement is building. The French capital is preparing a glittering kick-off to the Games, but this time there is an important difference. In a break from tradition, the opening ceremony will take place not in a stadium, but along the banks of the capital's iconic River Seine. Some 10,000 athletes will process in boats along the water in a 6-kilometre journey to reach the Trocadero Plaza, where the final bursts of the celebratory shows will take place. And there is another important first. Paris is planning for most spectators, those viewing from the upper quays, to witness the opening ceremony for free. The hope is that this will help make the Games more inclusive, because there is another, broader purpose here. Preparations for the Games are taking place in France at a time of deep national division. For the last few years, the country has been mired in protests, and the president, Emmanuel Macron, now a year into his second term, has seen his approval rating slide to record lows. This week on The Inquiry, we're asking, is Paris ready for the 2024 Olympics?
Part 1. Swimming in the Seine.
The River Seine flows for some 13 kilometres through France's capital. The waterway is home to over 30 bridges, and from many of these, there are impressive views of some of the city's historical gems, including the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, and the Grand Palais. But there is one key aspect of the Seine's charms in which it falls short. For a century, swimming has been illegal, and the reason is quite simply that it is polluted. So when in 2017 Paris won in the bid to host the Olympics, the city began a concerted programme to clean up the Seine so that it would be safe to enter its waters during the Games. At the heart of tackling the problem is dealing with the city's sewage system. To understand why, we need to take a trip back to a time before Paris had any sewers at all. Here's our first expert witness.
My name is Jean-Marie Mouchel. I'm professor of hydrology at Sorbonne University. I've been working in urban water science for some 20 years.
In the first half of the 19th century, waste from the homes of the inhabitants of Paris was picked up and dumped on the agricultural lands surrounding the city.
At that time, every house has a kind of tank in the basement where the collected fecal matter, say every month or every week, by people who worked during the night and who collected this. And it was also used to produce human fertilizers that were then spread onto the fields.
Back then, there were also many horses on the city's streets, creating more waste that needed to be washed away. So, at the end of the 19th century, there were moves to dispose wastewater both from the streets and houses together by constructing a drainage system underneath the city.
The decision was made to stop with this kind of management of the fecal matter, and it was decided that everything had to go into the same pipe. This was the creation of what is now called the combined sewer system.
Now, the pipes from that sewer system ultimately still dumped the waste in the same place as before, that is, the agricultural lands at the edge of the city. But as the population grew, the space available to dispose of the increasing amount of waste was beginning to dwindle.
The place that was available to spread that wastewater was reduced because the city was growing, and at the same time the number of people living there was also very strongly increasing. So there was not enough place in these sewage farms to treat all the wastewater.
In 1935, a new plan was drawn up and a treatment plant was built. Achères is today the second largest such plant in the world. But even Achères has limitations. When the rainfall in Paris is especially heavy, the excess water entering the system overloads it.
If you have too much water, you cannot send it to the wastewater treatment plant, because if you put too much water into the plant, it will not work at all. And so when the tanks are filled up, the water has to go somewhere. And the only place it can go is a river Seine.
I see. So that is intentional. It just goes down another pipe to the Seine automatically.
Yeah.
That's not an accident. It's designed like that.
Yes, it is designed like that.
This means that if Paris wants to clear up the Seine, it needs to find another place for the rainwater. And as you can probably imagine, this is a problem which is rather, shall we say, multifaceted. The first task is to ensure that rainwater from villages upstream from Paris doesn't enter the sewage system, but instead stays pretty much where it falls.
And this means that all the roofs of the houses must be disconnected from the sewer systems that comes out of the houses, and the water from the roofs must go in the garden. The problem is that it takes time because every house has to do a part of the job. And also in some parts of Paris city you cannot do it because the type of soil that you have doesn't permit a good infiltration rate. So you cannot always do it, but basically when it's possible, it's clearly the best way.
The second part of the strategy has been to build a vast underground tank to contain excess rainwater within the city itself. This is located close to the Gare Austerlitz on the left bank. But as our expert witness says, there will still be times during heavy storms that the system will be overloaded.
So the idea is to try to limit the amount of time when the runoff is too high. But you cannot limit always runoff. So it must be clear that bathing in the River Seine will not be possible at any time. There must always be periods where they will have red flags just to say that the water quality is not okay. We already know that it will happen.
Indeed, the summer of 2023 saw some of the heaviest rainfalls for 2 decades, and some Olympic open water test events needed to be cancelled. So organisers will no doubt be hoping for clearer skies when the Games kick off for real. The cleaning up of the Seine is but one of the items on the French capital's to-do list which needs to be completed ahead of the Games. Time for our next expert witness.
Part 2. The infrastructure.
My name is Florence Villeminot, and I'm a Franco-American journalist working at France 24, and I present the show French Connections, which looks at the intricacies of life in France.
Hosting the Olympic Games is a major commitment for any country from many perspectives, not least its toll on the climate and the public purse. In the lead-up to the Paris Olympics, the capital has embarked on over 70 construction projects. But the organisers claim the event will emit just a third of the CO2 of the Games held in both London and Rio. This is largely because the city is limiting construction by using existing or temporary infrastructures for 95% of its needs for the Games. And many of the sites have been chosen because they already have links to public transport.
A lot of existing beautiful places are going to be used for the Olympic Games. But sure, if you compare it to previous Olympic Games in Tokyo, Rio, or even London, construction certainly has been kept to a minimum, and there hasn't been a massive transformation of the cityscape like you might have seen in other cities.
At the centre of much of the action will be the Stade de France, located just north of Paris in the suburb of Saint-Denis. First opened in 1998, it is the country's largest stadium with a seating capacity of over 80,000. The stadium is already home to the French national football and rugby union teams for international competitions. And at the 2024 Summer Olympics, it's been earmarked for multiple events. Close by, a new aquatic centre is under construction, and also the accommodation for the competitors.
So there's the Olympic Village in Saint-Denis, which is being constructed. It's almost finished. And what's interesting is those apartments that are being built for the athletes will then be transformed into housing for everyday people, including social housing that will be affordable.
The word affordable is important here, and we shouldn't underestimate its significance. It's often central to the plans for Olympic Games that they're seen as an opportunity to give a struggling part of the hosting city an economic boost. The area of Saint-Denis, which, as we have said, is home to the Stade de France, with high rates of poverty and unemployment, will benefit from the Olympic Aquatic Centre, more homes and better transport links. This brings us neatly to the next topic, which has been the subject of much discussion, and that is whether the Paris underground train network will be able to handle so many extra visitors.
I just don't see how it's going to cope with this massive influx of people. Now, officials say that because the games are going to be happening in the summer, this moment when a lot of Parisians leave the capital, traffic tends to go down. So they say, people will be away, these new people will be in the city, so it's all going to work smoothly. But people are really worried because the system already seems really saturated.
The extension to the Metro Line 14 is perhaps the best hope. Line 16, the one called the official Olympics line that was going to link up several Olympic sites and put some of the capital's poorest suburbs on the Metro line, won't be ready in time. On the plus side, there will be the bus network and a far greater availability of bikes and cycle lanes.
There is some good news, but yes, they want to fall back on bikes and people walking. Maybe that will work, but it is likely going to be very busy, and no miracle solution has really been put forward up until now.
Then there is the vexed question of security, and one recent incident in particular which looms large in people's minds. In May of 2022, the Champions League final between Real Madrid and Liverpool took place at the Stade de France. Violence broke out and riot police ended up using tear gas.
Authorities are adamant that that won't happen again. They're using things like video surveillance and artificial intelligence to help monitor crowds, etc. That being said, that has drawn some criticism from digital rights organizations who see it as mass surveillance. But security really is the key issue, and they're running drills quite frequently, actually, to make sure that the Olympic Games will be safe.
It is, of course, important to get this right if the Games are to be seen as accessible and inclusive. But there is another barrier to fans showing up, and that is they may simply not be able to afford to.
Yes, even some athletes joined the outrage and said that tickets were way too expensive and they themselves wouldn't be able to buy tickets for their friends and family to come. There was a former gymnast, for instance. She said that it was easier to participate in the games than to actually buy tickets. A lot of people were just let down by what they saw as a promise to see the Olympic Games in person, and a lot of people just decided that they'll just watch them at home on TV, and that's the way they'll live the Olympic Games.
Something mysterious plagues County Mayo on the west coast of Ireland and its legendary Gaelic football team.
I believe in the curse. Yeah, I think it's real.
Is it just superstition? Or could there be more to it?
Sometimes I think there's something sinister going on.
What do we need to do to win an All-Ireland final for Mayo?
Listen to the curious tale of the Mayo Curse on Amazing Sports Stories from the BBC World Service. Search for Amazing Sports Stories wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Part 3. London, Rio and Tokyo.
If you think about the Olympics, they're delivered essentially on a 7-year cycle, or the games themselves on a 4-year cycle, but you're awarded games historically 7 years before the games. Those are immovable dates.
Our third expert witness works for an international planning and construction firm based in Dallas, Texas.
My name is Bill Hanway. I'm the global sports leader for AECO.
Bill was closely involved in the delivery of the Games in Rio in 2016, but also prior to that, London. He also advised Tokyo and is working on the Games to take place in the American city of Los Angeles in 2028. He explains that one of the challenges of the long lead time of the Olympic Games is that so much can change between a city winning the bid and the Games themselves taking place. For example, Britain was awarded the Games in 2005. 3 years later came the global credit crunch and property prices collapsed. It was a disaster for many people, except for those involved in constructing new buildings for the Olympics.
When the financial crash happened, we then put in all the bids. And so we end up with very good pricing, best contractors, great program delivery teams.
Then, after the Games, the economy bounced back. For the developers then, the London Olympics turned out to be very good timing. The other side of the argument, though, is that they failed to deliver the affordable housing that was promised because, quite simply, by the time it became available, prices had risen much higher. In 2020, the Tokyo Games were delayed due to the pandemic. When they did take place a year later, foreigners were not allowed to attend, and there was a cap on fans from home. Organisers thought up some creative solutions to get round the problem.
The broadcasters found different ways of adding sound to the games, not just the loss of crowd noise, so more microphones on the fields of play to hear more noise from the athletes. So there's always ways to find solutions, but the Tokyo example was particularly sad in terms of the loss of true spectators to join the games.
As we have said, another key constraint on the Games is that they must create a legacy for the people of the host country by revitalising struggling areas and spreading its spirit to other parts of the nation.
The Paris Plan is very heavily weighted towards a social and environmental sustainable legacy, which is slightly different than what London and Rio and others did, which is more about a built legacy. Both Paris and LA have a huge number of existing venues, and they are spread across the city. So it is really, how do you fit the games into the city in the most economic and sustainable way?
What about delays and concerns that you're not going to hit deadlines? How large do they loom?
So you try and mitigate concerns and risks as early as possible, but there are always some that come through at the very end. You can look at the London Games, where the security company that was awarded the contract for the games was unable to meet the demand and the Army had to step in. But those are the type of contingency plans that have to be ready to move in the event of a delay.
This then leaves us with the remaining question of whether French people are ready to welcome the vast number of fans poised to arrive in their capital, or whether they're too consumed by their own domestic troubles. Time for our final expert witness.
Part 4. The political landscape.
I think the French are generally very positive about the Games, actually. The French love sporting events, and sporting events have been a good way traditionally of bringing the country together. A lot of France's top athletes are not white. Many of them are of immigrant origin originally, or their families were. So it's a good way of addressing some of the racial tensions and bringing people together in unity around the flag and around their country.
Since 2018, the Republic of France has been convulsed by several waves of political unrest. The most recent began in June, when the shooting of an unarmed teenager by police sparked violent demonstrations nationwide.
I'm Rainbow Murray. I'm a Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University of London.
Our final expert witness explains that the backdrop to these and previous demonstrations is a bitter divide in the country between the haves and have-nots.
It's definitely not just about race. There's a strong sense of resentment about economic disadvantage as well. The yellow vest protests that we saw in 2019 and early 2020, before COVID took over, were much more about class and inequality. Those were people who felt that they were left behind by the more privileged, by the president of the rich, the chattering classes, who had no regard for the struggles of working class people.
In January, people took to the streets to show their opposition to an increase of the retirement age from 62 to 64. But even in the face of dwindling popularity, France's President Emmanuel Macron refused to back down.
He is seen as being representative of the economic elite, and his policies have been seen to favour members of the economic elite. The fact that he is a former banker certainly hasn't helped with that image. He's a bit aloof. He's very intelligent, but that can make him come across as condescending. He doesn't always engage well with the public, and he doesn't make much of an effort to relate to the average voter.
It's in this fractious political atmosphere that Olympic planners are hoping to deliver a one-off boost to one of France's poorest areas. Seine-Saint-Denis, with a population of some 1.5 million, lies to the north of Paris and is home to the Stade de France.
It's had a bad reputation for a long time as an area with high crime, high levels of deprivation, low levels of social mobility, and so the area is not generally seen as one that is desirable to live in. Most people are there by necessity rather than choice.
The area around the Stade de France has already undergone some regeneration, and the Olympics is an opportunity to continue that development with the building of a new aquatic centre, athletes' accommodation, and an extension of the metro line. Now we return to our question. Is Paris ready for the 2024 Olympics? Paris is the most visited city in the world. Quite simply, it is used to welcoming people. But there is clearly more to be done. A recent dry run in the form of the Rugby World Cup suffered from transport problems, leading some fans to miss the start of some of the games, and a practice set of swimming events in the summer had to be cancelled. But the Paris Olympics are about more than glitches. They're also about the environment and an equal society. Is Paris ready for the Olympics? One senses that the Games are not the end of a journey for France, but perhaps the beginning. The final word goes to our last expert witness and the prospects for what will be the centre of the action, Seine-Saint-Denis.
So it's a potential force for good, but some of the problems that the area faces, economic inequality, racial inequality, are not things that are going to be solved overnight by hosting an Olympic Games. They require much broader, deeper reforms that go far beyond the area and actually issues that France has to face as a nation.
This inquiry was presented by me, Tanya Beckett, produced by Jill Collins, researched by Matt Toulson, edited by Tara McDermott, and mixed by Kelly Young.